Hi everyone, I'm Tim Von Rieden, better known as Von Art Online, and I do these weekly Wednesday live streams every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Time. They're to discuss art, show some tips and techniques, hopefully learn something along the way, and maybe have some fun. So today we're going to be doing something that was submitted on the Discord channel, which is a community that is run and operated by my lovely mods, and I am now very much more frequent on it, which is the Von Art community, which is a Discord channel link below that you can join. And this one is under Von Art Room. You can see a stream suggestion. So if you have an idea that you want to discuss further, or maybe a technical scalar ability that you don't or you want to acquire, so in this case it would be learning fabric. This one was submitted by Shenviro, and they asked what about the way fabrics fold, something like that. And I'm taking that stream suggestion and turning it into reality. So if you'd like to see one that you are curious about, just put it on there, and who knows, I might actually do the stream that you suggested. Oh boy, I need to slow down the way I'm talking. I am jumbling over myself. There's also links to my Instagram, my YouTube, my store, blah blah blah, all that good marketing stuff. But you know what, I'm gonna skip most of that and jump right into it because I don't feel like self-promotion today. Instead, I feel like teaching. So let's go ahead and get going. Okay, so if there is a comment or question you have during the stream, please put @vonart so that I'm able to see it, and that way I can go in between the Cintiq and the comment section, because I'm going to be working kind of on this side of the room, and the comment section is on that monitor over there. So I got to go back and forth. So having a big black bar that says Von Art will help me see it. And I hope this doesn't bother you guys if I put the layers on the very side here. I guess I just need like a little hint, little reference sheet for me to see. Okay. And for those of you who are not familiar, this stream is basically talking about how to draw fabrics in your character art, in I guess just illustrations in general, and understanding how fabrics work. So I'm going to take it back all the way into what to think about fabrics, understanding the difference between materials, what to think about when you're thinking about the different materials that you're working with, how that applies onto your character when they're wearing it, because thickness and tightness definitely are a big concern when drawing characters with, let's say, the difference between leather or chiffon. You're definitely going to get a different way of drawing them. So we're going to go over that. And then there's 3 types of wrinkles that I always talked about when I worked at CG Cookie when working with fabric. And that's a hanging relaxed, stretched tension wrinkle, and then a scrunched wrinkle. And to understand fabric, you need an understanding of all 3. So we're going to go through all of that, and then I'm going to show examples of real life pictures of the masters from yesteryear, what they did, and the inaccuracies I see with younger artists, and then inaccuracies in my own art, because I don't feel like it's fair for me to call out other artists if I'm not able to reflect that and talk about my own mistakes in the past. So we're going to go through all that. I kind of organized this in the last 3 hours because I was so sick yesterday I didn't want to organize this last night. So if there's some layers that are not the most well laid out, that's why. And I am always honest with you guys, so that is my reasoning, which is also an excuse, and I never enjoy excuses, so shame on me. Okay. So let's get this blurry nonsense out of here. So let me make sure you guys can see all of this. I'm going to make this a bit smaller and move it to the side. Or you know what I'm going to do? How well can you guys see this? I might make my face camera actually smaller here. Let's see here. Which one is the box? Is it that one? Alright, I'm going to make both of these smaller just so that you guys can see it. And yes, for some reason my headband is acting like a green screen component. So unfortunately, you can see through my headband and onto the Photoshop file. I thought it was kind of cool, so I decided not to take off my headband, but just so you know, this was totally not intentional. And if you see, you can see right through that headband. If any of you guys know why yellow seems to be acting like a green screen on just a normal camera, I'm all ears. See what I mean? This isn't normal. All right. So, when thinking about fabrics, let's break it down into the very basics. So, maybe you are an artist that does something like this middle section here. Oh, I get to actually use my pen. This is weird. I haven't done a Photoshop working live stream tutorial in a while. So if you are one of these artists who really want to add fabrics in their clothing but doesn't seem to understand where the placements are, oftentimes we get these really lumpy looking shapes that are supposed to represent and imply fabric and folds, but it really just makes it look misshapen and very much the opposite of fabric. It almost looks like blobs of color and shape, and it's not really representing exactly what you want. So in this case, we're going to first focus on this section. So you know what? I'm going to actually zoom in. Man, all these abilities I have working digital. Okay, so all materials can be broken down into this little chart that I created a long time ago, and it's basically to represent the main two factors when thinking about materials besides your point of support and gravity, but it is the thickness and the tightness of the fabric you are working with. Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to take it back even further. I'm going to first talk about materials. I think most of us know that there's a significant difference between leather and jeans and tulle and cellophane and what's another one? Wool, spandex, and satin. And when thinking about those materials, I'm sure there's a lot of different ways of representing them appear in your mind. And things that are like spandex are probably more shiny, have a tightness to it, some really hard, small triangular wrinkles. And then things like wool are probably more bulbous and flowy and soft. And that's where this little chart comes in. Now, obviously, I don't think everything should be condensed into just this type of example, but I'm a very infographic type of learner, so I like to see visuals while I learn. So you can see on this chart, we have the thin and thickness, and then the loose and tight. So things like spandex are thin and tight, so it would land in between this spectrum. And usually these can be shaded and represented in a very similar manner. Now, there are characteristics between certain materials that will definitely differentiate them from others. So for example, let's see on here. So thin and loose, you could have silk, but you would also have chiffon or tulle, and those fabrics definitely have unique characteristics, but they still fall under the same way of thinking about how they're going to be flowing and how they would, lay on the body or lay in blowing in the wind, and they'd have very similar characteristics, like I said. So something to think about when you're thinking about any material, think about how thin or how tight it is. So that's the first thing. The next thing, see, I did this tutorial back in 2013, but I think I want to talk more about, actually, no, we can go into the next point. Okay. So the next point there are 3 types of wrinkles. Let me see how well this shows up here. I guess I'll have to kind of move it like this. It's hard to fit all of it. I forgot how to scrub zoom on PC Photoshop. If any of you guys know, I would love to know, because I can do that instead of letting you guys see a small picture. But there's 3 types of wrinkles. The first one is a hanging and relaxed wrinkle. So essentially, whenever you have fabric that's hanging, and this is the very, very, very basic form of fabric understanding. It's when you basically hang a giant piece of cloth over one point of support. So usually like a pole, coat rack, anything like that. And that's where you're going to be able to see, if it reaches the floor, you're going to be able to see all 3 of the wrinkles combined into one. So get in your head that there are 3 types of wrinkles, and most of them are usually found, especially with clothing on the body, in a scrunched or compressed or a stretched and tension. The only times that you'll really see it hanging or relaxed is on like an evening gown, or if a fabric is hanging and it's not touching any part of the body at the rim or at the hem of the fabric. But usually they'll fall in between these two. So, to give more visual color representations of what I'm talking about, when it's hanging on a single point of support, you're going to immediately see these very stressed looking stretch tension wrinkles. And these are very, I don't want to say completely straight, because they're not completely straight in every case, but they're very long, extended lines that I represented them in red because you can almost feel the tension on them. And it's because they're being pulled in a way, usually by gravity, and it's pulling it down, or it's being brought, like even if I move my sweater, you can see these lines that are forming on my chest that are these very pulled lines. Or if I like really start to pull it, this would be my point of support, and then these lines are all these tension lines that are creating from that. So when you think of the tension stretch lines, usually they're very straight and they almost look like they're being pulled in a direction. The next one are the hanging and relaxed, kind of like what I talked about, like an evening gown. Basically, they're more flowy. These are the ones you think of when you see these big, elegant dresses that have a lot of layering going on, and it almost creates this cool, it's like a back and forth pattern going back. It's almost like on a skirt, how it pillows in and then out and then in and out. It creates this cool formation, and that would mostly be represented by hanging and relaxed wrinkles. And the last one, which this is the one that confuses the most people for sure, are scrunched and compressed wrinkles. And basically, when you think of these wrinkles, you can think of jeans. So we're going to give good examples, and I'm going to show you pictures of what I mean. But usually, when you have 2 fabrics that bunch up against each other, you get these compressed wrinkles. And actually, I shouldn't even just say 2 fabrics bunch up against each other, but could be 1 fabric bunched against up anything. So in this case, you have the fabric bunching against the floor, and it's creating these scrunched and compressed looking wrinkles. They're not the pretty wrinkles that a lot of younger artists do. When you see them look like this, you see like fabric go down and it creates this perfect billowing shape. Why, thank you for following. Now, that's not to say it's not possible. You see a lot of manicured Photoshop images, or not even Photoshop, but even like wedding images where the gown or even the veil, the really long one, they'll put it on the floor and they'll perfectly space it out so that it'll create this ring. But you'll also have a lot of these wrinkles going up, and then they'll fade into this kind of puddle. But it's very rare because it's been manicured to look that way. And yeah, you can straighten and even out the fabric on the floor, but if you just let the fabric fall on the floor, it's going to create this very wrinkled, scrunched look to it. And that will be more believable and more realistic than if you try to just make it look like it falls into a pool. So that's where we get into the 2 points of support. So these would be the 2 points here. And when you do that, you're going to have these stretched and tension lines, but where they meet in the middle would actually create these scrunched and compressed wrinkles. Now, you see a lot of artists when they do this, they'll just kind of have lines like this, but this isn't as accurate as when they actually push against each other and they create kind of these divots, these triangles. And this is something that it took me a while to kind of understand, of having wrinkles push against each other and have these very kind of perpendicular lines touch each other. Because I think when we think fabric, everything's flowing and it has to be very pretty, and they never can, create like this wonky looking block shape. But in actuality, that's how fabric really does work. So I don't know where we get this grandeur illusion that fabric always has this very flowy look, when in reality, fabric has more of a crunched look. And even here's a statue of this angel I got. But if you look at the front, look how many scrunched and compressed wrinkles there are. And this is a good example of looking to artists of yesteryear and see how they were really careful with how they scrunched their wrinkles, but they definitely emphasized it, and they didn't shy away from making it look pretty for pretty's sake. They definitely made it look realistic, and then they were able to overemphasize it, and that's what made it look so over the top, especially with the angels, where you see the fabric like flowing around their arms, and you can just see the billowing of these fabric shapes, and it's like the wind is, you know, carried underneath of it and it's floating in midair. So it creates this very beautiful look, but you definitely want to focus more on the compressed and scrunch aspects. Okay. Let's see here. Magic headband for the win. Thank you, Fem. I'll answer some of the questions not related to fabric at near the end, but I think for now I'm going to focus more on the questions that are focused on fabric. Sarah, we can see that your brain is full of knowledge. Yeah, just I really should just draw like a brain in the upper left corner of this canvas so that, let's see here. This is so bizarre. So there we go. Now it's kind of a yellow headband. That's kind of what it looks like. It's so weird. Okay, so moving on. If you feel like your art falls into one of these categories, that's okay, because I was the same exact way. I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted to draw wrinkles, but this is definitely not an accurate representation of jeans, and you never want to draw jeans like this again. Just because I think it really does show that you are incapable of accurately representing wrinkles in clothing. It's not to say that you're a bad artist, it just means you're learning. And I feel like we all go through this stage, and that's okay. And I'm very open and willing to admit my own faults, and you'll see in some of the examples that of my old work that I definitely was falling into this category. So the thing that I see with fabric a lot is where we get this type of look, where it's almost like the start of a braid, but it's supposed to represent fabric. And this doesn't necessarily make any sense. And you'll see how jeans in reality have this very compressed look. And this is where I'm talking about. You have these two fabrics that are pushing up against each other. So you have obviously the fabric going down, and then you have the fabric being pulled up because of when you pull up your jeans, and the knee, since it's bending, creates this extra, it like pulls and pushes on the fabric in the middle. So this section here is a very scrunched looking wrinkle. And usually when I see people draw jeans, it's like both of their knees are more like, I guess, this image. Even if it was prettier, the only time the knee would, or the wrinkle really wouldn't be compressed is if the knee is bending slightly, and it creates that point of tension, and it has more of a solid, flat, bulbous look. But unless if your character is like slightly bending at the knees in a stance pose, more often than not, the jeans are going to have a little compression to them. Unless if they're like brand new and they really haven't been worn, then you won't get as many wrinkles. I mean, these are wrinkles that definitely showcase like jeans that have been worn for a while. And you kind of have to decide if you want your character to be represented in like a newly fashioned way, or if there's like well-worn jeans that the character has worn for a while. You probably want to add more of those wrinkles in. And there are times where if it's not as tight, I mean, these are definitely more fitting jeans to the body. If they're more loose or relaxed jeans, yeah, you probably won't get a lot of these wrinkles because there isn't point of tension or support on the jeans touching the body, so it's just kind of falling straight down. And that's something that we'll talk about as well. And then here's a good example down here of like a sleeve that's being pushed up. You want, and even, heck, I can even roll up my sleeve here. You can see how when I do that, it creates all these scrunched wrinkles, and almost from like the top of my shoulder down. And you can see in the example, it's the same exact thing. Actually, even as I'm standing up, you can see, let's see, if I twist my body, let's do it this way. You can see how there is a point of support here, or no, sorry, here, it's hard for me to do this while looking at the camera. So when I twist my body, all these wrinkles are being stretched from this source of support, and it's creating all these tension lines going up. So think about how when your character is moving in a pose, how it's going to affect the wrinkles. So if I hunch over on this sweater, you're going to get a bunch of these compressed wrinkles in this area because this is all loose fabric and it's just billowing on itself. But then if I stick my chest out, it's going to be very flat looking because the fabric is being taut tight against the actual skin underneath. So you definitely want to be aware of when you're adding wrinkles, you probably are having more of a relaxed pose. When if you're taking wrinkles away and you're adding more of like stretched or tension wrinkles, they're more prominent in the way that they're holding the fabric on their body. So the same thing could be said like the jeans up here to the sleeve down here. You're compressing all the wrinkles on each other and it creates this really cool look. But what you don't want to do is one of these examples down here where the wrinkles don't touch the outline. And I've seen myself do this as well. And let me move this up here. Where it's almost like you draw the implications of wrinkles on the outer edge, but then when you draw the wrinkles on the inside, they don't actually touch the edge itself. And it's a very bizarre look. And you want a lot of the wrinkles coming off of the actual the line art of the fabric, because it almost gives not only more of a believability, but it represents how the wrinkle is forming around the entire arm rather than just on the front. Because these wrinkles here imply that the wrinkle is only in the front and it doesn't wrap around the arm. And yeah, wrinkles don't necessarily have to go all the way around the arm, because sometimes they do just form on a side. But when every single wrinkle is only on the front, it gives this very strange representation of fabric. Okay, so moving on from here, let me see if we got any questions. Suzanne, hey, how are you doing? Oh, are we learning about draperies? Oh, damn, totally forgot to raid you. I just finished my stream. Oh, that's okay. But thanks for joining. Basically, it's on fabric and folds in character art and knowing and understanding how to draw it. Dr. May Stardust says, a binge of a tangent unrelated to fabric. I love your art, but I wonder, why do you draw in the first place? I feel like I spend most of my time learning stuff and techniques, but when it comes to actually producing something original, I'm stuck. I have ideas and feelings I'd like to convey, but learning anatomy does very little to help me out. And I always feel I need to learn more to even start creating. Hope you understand what I mean. Totally do. And I had a lot of friends where they would only do studies. There was one in particular I got kind of frustrated with, because all they would do in their sketchbooks were studies, and they weren't actually creating anything. So I think there's this weird fear that you can't actually create until you know everything first. And I totally am against that whole idea. My way of learning when I was younger was to just always put whatever I was interested in learning into the drawing or the illustration that I was working on. So like the big drawing where I'm going to do an underwater scene, I've never drawn a lot of aquatic nautical things before, but I'm going to just learn it as I go in the drawing, and then I'll like look up reference images and I'll look up tutorials while I'm actually doing the illustration, and then apply that knowledge that I'm learning into the piece. I think that's the best way to learn. I think even streams like what I'm doing today is like good reminders for those who may have already known this stuff, and then good like start gateways for people to run through of like, okay, he's giving me the basics and standards of understanding fabric, but now it's up to me to actually apply it into my practice. So you can learn all you want, but if you never actually apply it, I feel like that learning goes to waste. So my advice to you would be, you have the right idea, you really want to learn and you want to get better, which is great. But I would say take that motivation and actually apply it to creating work rather than doing studies. Because you don't want to be locked into only doing studies and feeling that you'll never be good enough to actually start doing the work. Because I hate to say it, but no one ever feels like they're ready. And even now, I feel like, yeah, I have an understanding to some degree, but even I am very new to a lot of the art world, and I'm always learning. Every year I feel like, well, if I only knew this last year, if I only knew this like 2 years ago, I'd be so much better. And that's going to happen to you constantly throughout your career. So I guess the sooner that you accept that fact, the sooner you'll be able to just get into your work and jump into it and know that studies are good to do on a minimal amount or in your practice, but I don't think they should ever be the focus. I mean, that's my opinion, but I hope that answered the question. Okay, so moving on. The next thing was basically taking examples of real life fabric, so like taking photos of yourself wearing different fabric, and then understanding where are these 3 types of wrinkles. And when I look at this, oh well, thank you, Rainy Liss, for bidding. I don't know how cheering. That would be it. Cheering bits. Yeah, thank you. So this is a good example of if you want to practice this for yourself, take a picture of yourself in different fabric, in different clothing, and then put yourself in a position where you can see a lot of wrinkles, and then really observe and analyze what are these wrinkles. So in this example, I was wearing a cotton long sleeve shirt, very similar to the one I'm wearing actually. And on this one, I guess I should have grabbed the original picture, but there was a lot of compression on the sleeve, which made sense since we're pushing it up the arm, so we have those 2 points of action meeting up against each other. We have me raising one arm, which is going to create a lot of these stretched and tension lines because the point of support is being pulled higher, and to basically compensate, these lines are then pulling from that single point of support. And then finally, since the bottom of my shirt actually isn't tight against my body, it's hanging loose, so then we get these hanging and relaxed wrinkles. And this is a good example of all 3. I think that's why I chose this picture out of all of them, because you see a good, why thank you for following. You see a good example of how the 3 types of wrinkles are used in a single image, and how I'm not compensating in this giant blank triangle here with like adding wrinkles that just aren't there. It's okay to have blank space in your fabric as long as it makes sense. And I think especially when I was starting off, I felt I had to add wrinkles everywhere to give the illusion that it was realistic. So if this was the drawing I was doing before, like when I was in my college years and before I was using reference like this, I would have probably added some like compressed wrinkles down here and more lines going down just to fill in the space. But now that I'm older, I've really been comfortable with allowing fabric to just be fabric and to not compensate with what I think is the right way to represent fabric and then to actually represent it the way it actually is. So that was a weird thing that I learned back then. And even to this day, I feel like there are times where I fall back into that mindset and I feel like I'm not creating fabric realistically, but I'm doing it artistically. And it's good to always take reference. So I'm always taking reference photos of myself, especially in different fabrics or of my friends. And I think just for more of an accurate representation. Now I do deviate a little bit from it if I feel like the composition could work better with certain value shifts. But for the most part, I'm looking at the wrinkles as a very kind of standard guideline for me to follow. Okay, so before I'm gonna go into the master's work, but first I'm gonna go into the real life example pictures that I just found from my phone before the stream started. Okay, so here are just 3 simple examples of me wearing different clothes and the type of wrinkles we have. So let's go back into the same colors that we were using. So red is going to be the stretched and tension lines. So in this first example, you can clearly see these very long tension lines going on here because I'm lifting my arm, very similar to the last picture, and it's creating these long, almost straight lines. And then I'm going to create another color. So these are the scrunch. Oh, I totally misspelled that. Supposed to be a she there. There we go. Or wrinkled, I'll just say. And you can see a lot of them going on here. And then this is where you hear the diamond wrinkle a lot. If you've ever seen tutorials on Pinterest, they definitely talk about the diamond wrinkle. So there's one right there. And then we have a lot of this layering on layer on layer on layer. And it creates this kind of cool look to it. And never feel like you have to underdo compression wrinkles. I think a lot of people get nervous by having a lot of wrinkles in their work and it'll feel like it's compensating. But I promise it's not. And if you want to simplify a little bit, you can. But why not create a very scrunched looking fabric wrinkle? So same thing up here because the fabric is rolled up my sleeves on both arms. And then there is, I guess, a little bit of a hanging wrinkle. So let me show that one with green. But actually, the better example would be on Josh, on this side, the ring around the arm. See how this sleeve is creating a lot of negative space? So a lot of the times with hanging wrinkles, you get a lot of negative space because there isn't points of tension to cause wrinkles, and that's what gives that very simplistic shape. And then I guess possibly down here, no, I guess this would even be more of a stretched wrinkle because we have the point here fighting the point here, so it's creating this line as well. So moving on to the next one. Actually, you know what I can do really quick? Let me just put a white background behind these. So you can see my sloppily written work here. So for this middle image, I'm going to pull it down. Mind you, this is a good example of me awkwardly taking photos of myself for reference, and I promise you I do it all the time, so I have no shame. I lost shame long ago about doing this. So this is a good example where you have a lot of these hanging lines. They're just kind of free flowing. Yeah, there might be points of tension on the shoulders, but it's not like I'm exaggerating them because I feel like that's when it kind of turns into a stretch wrinkle. Now, if it wasn't tapered at the bottom here, this would definitely be a sweater that would go out to here and it would create a very big relaxed line and it would be a lot of just negative space. But since there is a tapering on the bottom and it's pulling closer to my waist, the fabric is actually being slightly pulled in, and that's what will create some of these more tense lines. Now, sometimes tense can be more subtle, so that's why not every stretch line is like this super extreme, like when you're pulling, like latex or something, you get those very strong lines. It could even be very subtle like this, and it's good to know the difference and that they're the same though at the same time. Obviously, a lot of scrunch wrinkles going on once again right there. And in this final example, this is basically the equivalent of the jean that we were talking about earlier, on how here you can see clearly, even though I'm not bending, I'm standing straight tall, we have a lot of these scrunch wrinkles going on here, and then we have a lot of negative space above and below. And the actual outline of the body, let me use a different color here. There's a lot of these in and outs. And the reason for that is this is it's a thicker fabric and it's a stiffer fabric. So it's not going to be very free flowing and loose. It is going to create a lot of this compression and wrinkle look to it. But the most area of the compression are going to be kind of these conditioned, almost like, it's like muscle memory in a way, where the wrinkles have been folded and unfolded so much from me bending my legs that it just created this permanent wrinkle area in the middle. And that's what I was talking about earlier with the wrinkles in fabric. So maybe even just look on your phone or look at photos that you've taken of yourself and then see where are these three type of wrinkles and start pulling them out of observation for yourself in the future. And I think you'll start to see a correlation, and it's kind of cool actually when you start to get it. Okay, so the next one, I'm going to show my own inaccuracies when I was younger in art, because I think it's fair that if I actually went to DeviantArt and just went to the newest and then just pulled some examples from random artists I don't know, and I just pulled some examples of things that I don't necessarily think are accurate and why I don't think they're accurate. And these are just common, I think, mistakes that a lot of younger artists make. So to do that, I feel like it's only fair if I show my own from yesteryear. Okay, so these were drawings I did in college. I'm just learning Photoshop, and if you look at the wrinkles, I guess I'll do a quick zoom in on all three. You can see how I kind of fall into the blobby territory. So none of these actually fully represent clothing. I guess this one would probably be the closest, but it's still not correct. And the one with Jim on the far right here, it's basically just a weird bumpy outline of what fabric is implied and represented, but it's not accurate at all. And especially with like the knee, it should be creating such a point of tension with it being so bent and then him leaning back so far, but it's not expressed through the wardrobe. And because of that, it almost loses the action in the overall piece. I feel like it does lose some of the dynamic because the wrinkles in the clothing don't accurately represent the positioning and the dynamics of the what's going on. So something to think about. Sometimes not doing your wrinkles correctly can almost downplay the scene at which you're trying to create. But a really good example of me not knowing what the heck I'm doing is the first two. Now, these were part of the first book that I ever had to do in one of my classes in college, and I had no idea how to work Photoshop, so that was like a learning curve in itself. But at that time, I really didn't study fabric either. So me trying to do both at the same time was this. At the time, I was actually pretty proud of them, but I think that's the point of every artist, is you should be able to look at your old work and kind of cringe and be like, ugh, like, thankfully I feel like I've gotten better. But if you look at this, the first thing I notice is there really isn't a difference in the way that I'm shading between leather and the gold on the belt and the, I guess, cotton would be the fabric he's wearing. And maybe even the plastic on the goggle part, they're all shaded the same. And I don't really have any different unique properties in the way that I'm shading it to let the viewer know what each material is. So that's the other thing about understanding wrinkles. Well, I thank you for following, is it helps the viewer understand what they're looking at. And this is back in the day when I used to shade black for the shadows and white for the highlights. So that's why you see a lot of that going on here. So the biggest problem with my first image here is in this area where there should be a lot of scrunching going on because he is bending his elbow. There should be a lot of these tension wrinkles because there is a point of tension from the elbow that would be creating these lines going around. And instead we get nothing. It is literally, if I just crop this part out, it would probably look like a really weird green melon vegetable, and it wouldn't look like fabric, and that's a problem. And then even in the middle here, we have a belt that is seemingly holding up the pants, but also not connected to the pants in any ways. I guess that was my pre-fantasy, like Final Fantasy way of like, oh, just put on a belt. People will get it. But there should be a lot of diamond wrinkles and compressed wrinkles going on here because you have the fabric from the shirt going, basically being tucked into the belt, and there is no wrinkles whatsoever, which definitely is a problem. And then lastly, in the shorts, there's no wrinkles coming off the crotch area, even though there is, the way that it's sewn and the way that it's stitched would definitely have some lines of tension because of the way he's standing more with his legs out. And then, well, like I said, I could keep ripping my own art apart, but let's keep moving. This one, literally, this is just a blue blob. He is just a boy that is stuck inside of a blue blob. So I don't need to talk too much about this one besides how weirdly shaped and blobby it looks. And I think this is something that I will talk about when I went to DeviantArt and looked for random art, that this just seems to be a beginner thing that we all work through. So if you're in this area, we've all been there. This one I'll talk about last. And then this one, actually, kind of like what I said earlier, it loses a lot of line action because of the way that the wrinkles are expressed, basically by not having any wrinkles. And instead I was trying to be like all cool and show, oh, bounce lighting from the solar flare of the paneling onto his pants. You can see how bounce light works, blah, blah. But in reality, there are so many other things that are wrong with this drawing that we're just going to move on. And then with this one, you can see how I'm starting to look at wrinkles in a different way. There's definitely a jump from these two into this one because of the way I am drawing the rolled up sleeves, the little wrinkles on the t-shirt, and the pants wrinkles going straight down. You definitely see a lot of trying, and I think this is where I started to understand that I was doing wrinkles wrong. And it's kind of good to see how these horizontal lines in the wrinkles kind of complement and completely contrast the lines going straight down on the pants, and that's how you can have lines kind of intersect with each other just by wrinkles to help direct the viewer's eye. And it creates more interest. And it implies what the fabric is, because otherwise you'll be stuck in this area where it's basically just a green jelly bean fruit thing. So, going into DeviantArt, I decided to just pull from artists randomly. I swear there's no bias, and I'm not trying to be mean. This is all for education purposes here. So these are the 3 examples, and you can see how the first one falls into a similar category that my art did, where it just kind of has more of a blobby shape and feel to it. There's no real understanding of points of tension or the different types of wrinkles, but to give the idea of fabric, we add lines and wrinkles. But in reality, none of these wrinkles make a lot of sense, especially like that one doesn't make any sense. And then with the jeans, you can see they're starting to understand where wrinkles go, but because of this outline shape being so monotone, it still feels like a blue blob. Like if that would have been a different color, it wouldn't even look like jeans. It'd probably look like sweatpants. So think about your wrinkles where you're placing them, and it's okay not to have wrinkles everywhere. So in this case, I probably would just have more of like a sharper wrinkle on the back because of that elbow being bent. It's basically pulling the fabric to be more taut on her skin, and it would create less of a fabric or less of a wrinkle and more of a smooth transition down her arm. And there might be wrinkles down here, but especially in the back of the arm, you can see before and after how it just feels better. Like in this way, it almost looks like her arm's awkwardly in the fabric, but the fabric's so big it wrinkles on either side. But if you want to show that the skin is touching the fabric, have it be a nice clean line. And then in this one, this is basically an example of not having any wrinkles, and it's like lightly implying them. You can kind of see it in the middle here and on the knee. But you can see how, since the fabric isn't bunching or bending, it almost looks like a toy. You know how they have the, what are those called? Basically the movable parts, and where the hinges are, it kind of collapses into itself, and then it exposes the bendy knee that's underneath. Like I had Buzz Lightyear, he has the ball on the knee, and the parts of him just swing around. This is kind of the same thing, where then immediately this takes it out of the realm of fabric and takes it into something more artificial, and it almost feels like a toy to me. This doesn't actually feel like it's supposed to be depicting an actual person. And I have no idea what's going on with the arms. I think it's supposed to be a hoodie, and you can see how they are implying more of these wrinkles, but it's such a staticky looking wrinkle. I almost get like a fur look from it, and I'm sure that's not the intended fabric, unless if it is, then who knows. But I really feel like it's not. And to imply the underlying anatomy on a looser type fabric definitely does not make any sense. If you want to imply anatomy going on underneath the fabric, you do it subtly, or you do it with tighter fabric. So if you do it with spandex, obviously you're going to see the underlying anatomy and what's going on. But if you're doing it with like a sweater or jeans, you probably don't want to imply anatomy, especially like with a crease underneath the bicep, unless if that fabric is so tight on the body that it actually would show the shadow underneath the bicep. And then lastly, this one where the shirt is being pulled so tight underneath of her chest area, it almost looks as if someone is grabbing on this part of her shirt, and it's like creating those tension lines. But since there's nothing pulling it down, it does create this very strange illusion of wrinkles that doesn't quite make any sense. And I'm trying to look at the rest. I guess you should have more bunching in the armpit, and even with like the bottom of the skirt, you can see how the hemming, it's supposed to go in and out, or even like this type of pattern, but the frill doesn't follow it. So it almost looks like the frill and the skirt are two separate images that are being placed on one another, and it doesn't really follow a realistic look. And even with the wrinkle in the tie, you have this wrinkle here, but to have that shadow down the middle line, it's almost like there's a giant wrinkle in the middle of the tie. There could be a giant wrinkle in the middle of the tie, but most likely ties lie pretty flat. And to represent that, you wouldn't need a shadow. And that's a good example of like a simple fabric that would be free hanging that has that negative space like we were talking about with 0 wrinkles. So this is a good example of actually taking out the wrinkles would probably improve the piece. So let's go ahead. Let me see what would happen. Because like I said, I just found these images before the stream started, so I didn't get a chance to paint over. So even this wrinkle is a little weird here. Should be more of like a compressed one. So like that, you can see how that already feels better than when it's just being this pulled down. It's almost like her shirt's melting, and it's okay to have a base area where you don't have any wrinkles. Okay, actually let me look at the questions. I feel like I've skipped a bit. Yeah, Treasure Planet. I love Treasure Planet. It's probably my second favorite Disney movie after Beauty and the Beast. Oh, well, thank you guys for coming. And please be sure to put @Vonner before any comment or question that you want me to see. No, this is not mine. I'm sorry. These are the random ones I found on DeviantArt. Okay, well, thank you, Owglar, for following. Oh, wait, let me take a sip of tea. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is the masterwork from yesteryear. Okay. So why are these so memorable in a lot of our minds as artists of why these work and why they're regarded as masterful work? And this is kind of what I was talking about earlier too, about this very free flowing fabric where it like billows and the wind is catching it. It's like it captured that moment and it's captured forever in this beautiful, serene, majestic, over the top way. But I love the way that they captured fabric because you can see how it's not flowy in the way that I think we're thinking in our minds it is. So let me go ahead. I'm going to make a new layer. So you can see how a lot of the fabrics going on here, why thank you for following, are very much angular. They're compressing into one another. Actually, this is a good example here. The fabric's flowing around, and then it crunches right here. This is a beautiful compressed wrinkle. And same where the hand is pushing against the body, we get all those compressed wrinkles in there. And then we get a lot of the tight wrinkles from where it's being pulled and pushed. And especially in this illustration here, you see a lot of these free hanging lines that are the wrinkles. We get a lot of the compression because the skirt is reaching the bottom. And we get a lot of these tension lines. So you get those mix. So I really do believe that the masters had an understanding of fabric so well. Probably because a lot of them were wearing a lot of this type of fabric, or the art that they were representing of, I mean, at the time it was very religious based. So they were drawing, why thank you for following, these figures that were normally robed in like just very long, heavy fabric. So a lot of them did have to study fabric and understand how it worked. And that's why I think you see a heavier understanding back in the day than you do now, because who do we know that really wears long fabric on an everyday basis? And I feel like most of us are wearing jeans and t-shirts and hoodies and things of that nature. So I feel like we've gotten somewhat a better understanding of drawing those, but at the same time, I still feel like it's become so simplified, we forgot to really emphasize the wrinkles, and then the clothing becomes more blobby looking. So I think looking at the artists of yesteryear and really understanding what they were doing in representing their wrinkles can help us for our own character work. So let's see what else I got here. Oh, this is a great one. So let's say this is the free hanging wrinkle. So this obviously would be a free wrinkle, and this is where you get these fun, shapes like this, where they kind of go back and forth. So these are free wrinkles. These are fun to draw. These are the ones that, if you do too many of them, I think it can give this weird illusion of it looking blobby. So I think having a mixture of the free wrinkles with these compressed wrinkles up here, actually I'll do a different color. And you can see a lot of that bunching going up there, and even down here, and right here. And that's where you see those wrinkles that have more of this type of look. You're going to have them crossing and bunching up. And it's okay. I think this is the one that scares artists the most, but I promise you, if you start including it in your work, I think you'll see a higher level of not only realism, but you'll see yourself having fun with drawing fabric more. And then lastly, let me grab a different color. Stretched wrinkles are very much from her waist, where it's being pulled really tight, so it's creating all these wrinkles coming off of the skirt. Because your point of support isn't actually a point, it's like a ring. It's that belt that's pulling that fabric tight, and it's creating all the wrinkles because of it. If she wasn't wearing this belt, you'd see a lot more of the free hanging wrinkles rather than it being more tight. You see it even pulling upwards as well. So stretched always has a point of support that is pulling it, or that is pushing it or compressing it, and that's something to keep in mind. And then we got, oh yeah, so here's a good example of a lot of free hanging fabric, because their dress isn't hitting the floor. That's where you get those fun folds that we were just talking about. And I like this image in the center because her knee is pushed out forward, so it's creating that point of tension. And you see a couple, actually if you look really close, there's a few lines, but this is your point of support, and the wrinkles are coming off of that, and then they kind of relax into this very straight line. And that's another thing I think with fabric, and I know I get caught in this way too often, is we feel we need to flow it and curve it. But the masters of yesteryear, they're like, no, it's straight. And if you really look at fabric, it is cut at an angle, or it's when it's cut straight, because of that point of support from her knee pushing out, the fabric's being pulled up on this edge, so it's creating that straight line. And it's something that's okay to do. You can see like the artist on here, how the bend, this wrinkle that goes all the way to the bottom, probably not a realistic wrinkle. And it probably should appear more. Feels weird critiquing masters of yesteryear. Kind of similar to the image on the right, you can see before and after. Actually, how I believe it should be more free hanging, because it's not tight against the skin, unless if the fabric is a tighter fabric, it's not as loose. But because it's more of a nightgown, it definitely implies that it's looser. So because of that, you would think it would have more of a relaxed line around the edge. And then the image on the right is just a great example of scrunched wrinkles. They're everywhere. And then you have this point of interest on this knee, and you see these lines of action pointing right to it. So I guess I'm repeating myself a lot, but I think I'm just kind of driving home the point of when there's a point of support anywhere, or I keep saying point of action sometimes, I just caught myself. But if you see a point of support, you're going to have these tension lines coming from that point of support because it's pulling on that fabric. And then wherever it's bunched up, you're going to get those compressed wrinkles. And then wherever you have that point of tension, actually, look at these. There's two right next to each other, but they're all leading. I mean, this is just a really smart composition because these wrinkles are then leading to the arm, which is pointing straight to the face. So you have this very long shape that's basically saying, look at the face. And then it's reinforced by these wrinkles going up in the direction as well. So where can you have fun with this? Oh, I'm sorry. I should put it more here. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. So this is a good example of heavier reflective fabric. So in this case, satin. And it has that sheen to it. And you can create all these really cool effects. The one on the right is actually one of my favorite fabric. I call it a fabric study because this artist basically overloaded an entire picture with just fabric that is reflective and it has these fun looks to it. But look at all the subtle wrinkles within the giant wrinkle shape. So her legs are bent, so it's creating the point of tension here and here. So you see a lot of these lines reflect that. But within the fabric that is inside of the initial wrinkle, you get these secondary wrinkles. So I don't want to dive too much into that because I think that's where it can get a little confusing for artists. But basically, if you have a fabric that has a stiffer quality and that has been kind of altered by a human enough, like this type of fabric is more crunchy. I guess that's the best way to describe it. And I'm sure you can like hear the fabric noise in your head when I say like a crunchy fabric. But there's going to be all these wrinkles that are created because of the way it's sewn into the fabric. It's creating all these little tension points. So there's always going to be secondary wrinkles within that on the giant gown. So then you have like the main wrinkles and then you have the secondary wrinkles. And you can kind of break it down into the larger shapes would be obviously the primary wrinkles, and the ones within those would be the secondary. And I think the image on the right is literally like my favorite example of doing that. And then you have these two fabrics that contrast one another in terms of how they play with light. Obviously the sheen satin reflects it, and then it almost looks like I don't know if that would be chiffon or I don't know exactly what that fabric is, but it absorbs the light. So having those two fabrics in the same gown, but like striped, and then having them reflect in the wrinkles, it's just such a master work and understanding of how fabrics work and how different fabrics reflect and absorb lighting differently. So I would always recommend looking at the masters of art from yesteryear if you want to really understand, especially fabric, but even in terms of color and I mean, a lot of this is realism, but you can see the techniques that they're using can be applied to even styled. So if this was animated, like if it was in a Disney movie, let's say, or even like Anastasia, I don't know why that one came to my mind first, the animators would simplify this dress and look at those primary wrinkles and then accurately simplify it in the best way they can. And that's what will give an accurate representation without it being full-on realism. And I think that's why I don't always fully recommend realism to everyone, but I think it's good to understand realism to then break into your own style. And the other two examples are basically the same thing, where you have a lot of these primary wrinkles, and then you have the secondary wrinkles within them because of the fabric being more crunchy and having a mind of its own, if you will. And even no matter regardless what fabric it is, though, it can't change the primary wrinkles. The primary wrinkles will I mean, they'll be slightly different depending on the thickness and the tightness and what material, but they'll always kind of give the overall shape that the wrinkles will. And then the secondary wrinkles will be basically because of the material you're working with. And I know that that's a mouthful, but I think you guys understand what I'm saying here. So then when I'm looking at my own art, I'm definitely taking a lot of the knowledge that I've learned over the years with fabrics, and the example on the left here with Little Red's woof, basically you see a lot of different wrinkles happening in one image, especially contradicting with the wolf and the little girl. So in the wolf, you see these wrinkles up here, not because the fabric is being pulled up because it's being like rolled up to his elbow, but because of the way leather is. I always kind of try to represent like a faux leather type material. But once you stitch it and seam it all together, if you wear that jacket for a while, those wrinkles that are basically going to become permanent on your the fabric or whatever clothes it is, in this case a jacket, they'll become basically like permanent, regardless of if it's being pushed up the sleeve or just relaxed. That fabric has been conditioned enough times to just lay in that wrinkled position. Now I was trying to do that up here, and then letting there be more of a relaxed look to it at the bottom. And then same with like the bottom of the jacket. I'm not adding any wrinkles in this area because if you look at a leather jacket, usually, unless if it's, tighter near the belt line on this area, if it's a free flowing or free hanging jacket, you won't get those wrinkles. And then same with the jeans, I try to do, you can see the difference between a lot of scrunchy well, thank you for following. A lot of scrunching on this leg because it's straight versus the bent knee on this leg, and it's creating more of the tension. So the wrinkles would all be behind where the knee is folding over. And then on the little girl, you have this very obviously strong, relaxed wrinkle from her cape. And then you also have a compressed wrinkle here because you have the two fabrics bunching up on one another. And then same with the jacket up here. And then the lines here are technically the stretch lines because of the hood being sewn tighter and then kind of releasing into the cape. And then same with her dress. You have that nice relaxed line. Kind of like what we were talking about with the other image. And then with something that's a little more billowy, this is where you can kind of have fun with it because, why, thank you for following. With more billowy fabric, you don't have to rely on gravity, like holding it down or having it conform to the body as much, because the fabric can kind of do what it wants. It's so lightweight and freeform that it'll create this cushioning and secondary wrinkles, very similar, not as well done as these. So it'll have this billowy shape, but there'll be all these secondary and tertiary wrinkles within it that you can kind of just have fun with the shape. And that's exactly what I did. But then look at her gloves, and then look at like this pin. This is an example of using, so this would be like more of a free form, but then you have the stretched wrinkles from this pin going on, and then you also have the stretch wrinkles from her, actually these would be compressed wrinkles from her glove, because when she's bending her glove to put it on her hip, you have the wrinkles that are so tight, or the fabric that's so tight on the skin, bunching up because the skin underneath is pushing it against itself, and that's what's creating this look here. And then even on the seam line of the side of the glove, because it's pinching the fabric to create that smooth look and as if the fabric is all one piece. But in reality, most gloves are stitched together from two separate fabrics. And because of that, you're going to get this pinching effect. And I tried to really emphasize that on the side here. And you can see more wrinkling happen. Same thing with this side. And since that arm is being lifted up, you get all these compressed wrinkles because it's pushing the fabric against itself. So you'll see it a lot in my art, especially with the new one that I did with the angel. And the layering here is just very obvious from reference that I took. but you can see how many different types of wrinkles there are. Or, sorry, just the 3 wrinkles, sorry, that I've just explained over and over and can't seem to remember that there's only 3. So you get the tension ones. You see a lot of these. Why, thank you for following. You get the compressed ones. That's a blue, compressed. And that's where the fabric kind of meets itself, and that's where you get a lot of the floppy crunch look. See that everywhere. And then lastly, the free hanging. And I really tried not to have too much free hanging except for one area, which is this wrinkle here. And that's because it's not intersecting with anything besides the air. And it has this very relaxed, solid line. Kind of like when we were looking at the master's work, they had this very sharp, angular cut to the fabric. And I actually, now that I look at this, I probably should have included maybe one more somewhere else, because I think it's a little imbalanced only having one free hanging, but that's the decision I made. And there's just a lot of compressed wrinkles. Actually, there's more compression than there is tight wrinkles. And that's what creates kind of this like almost melting fabric look. So let me look at the questions we have, and then I'm just going to show a real life example with the fabric I have behind me. Fem says, oh yeah, move my microphone. Thank you for that tip. Tishel says that angel is exactly the same as the one in the other painting. Wait, which one are you talking about? Is it really? Did I put 2 of the same images? Like these 2, you mean? I mean, it's definitely a very similar styling for sure. I think that's what you mean. Oh, these 2 angels. Oh my gosh, you're right. Oh, how funny is that? Credit where credit is due. That literally is the same angel. Oh my gosh, Digital, that's really funny. I'm gonna have to show that to some of my friends. Wow. That's crazy, especially after the big drama that happened last month with raw straws and copying. Look at this. Look at the old masters doing the same thing, getting inspired and then basically creating it and calling it their own. Wow. Unless if this is the same artist. Actually, I'm not sure which artist it is, but even that seems weird that they would be copying themselves and drawing the exact same pose. Good call, though. That's very, very strange. Okay. So let me go ahead. I'm going to get the polls ready to show you a quick example in real life and something you can do for yourself if you want to do kind of like a study reference sheet. So let me go ahead and do that. You guys observe the angels and how they copied one another. Unless if it is the same artist and how he copied himself. And feel free to ask me any question, because after this, I'm going to cut the stream. Because then I'm going to go get Subway. And then I'll probably take a nap, so hopefully I can feel better. Yeah, it's got 1 point of interest. Okay, so here is an experiment that you guys can do at your house if you want to do a study of fabric. And it's essentially find some kind of a hanging pole that would act as your point of interest. In this case, it's my light stand. But if you have a coat hanger or a lampshade, well, thank you for following. You can use that as well. Essentially, grab whatever piece of fabric you want. This one's actually a heavier fabric, so it creates more of those dense wrinkles that have a lot of those secondary wrinkles, which I really like. Throw it over your point of interest. and you'll be able to see a few things. Okay, so you guys can't necessarily see. I'm gonna actually make it full screen. Full screen, Tim. Alright, just for a little bit. Oh, that's so weird. My headband still sees through the Cintiq. Oh, weird. I don't know why this is happening either. It's like I have an angel on my mind right now. Weird. It's like a weird peekaboo game. Anyway, sorry. You can see this would be your point of interest. These would be your stretch and tension lines. This part that's hanging off, this would be your relaxed line right here. And then the area on the bottom of the floor. Look at all the compression wrinkles going on down here. And then you can edit it to kind of fit your needs, as they would say, for what you want to draw. But then really try to create a cool bottom floor pooling effect. It's almost like the queen from the Snow White and the Huntsman movie, how it had this like gold fabric that would just melt into the floor. This is the kind of example I would definitely want to paint, and that's why when I did the angel, this is the fabric that I chose. Okay, so that... Whew. Oh, even my sleeve? Wait, what? Oh, because I'm wearing a yellow wristband. Oh, that's so weird. What is going on? Why is yellow unable to be registered? That's so weird. I actually don't know. Okay. So then the second study that you can do, and mind you, these are really quick studies. They don't have to be super realistic or anything. Is grab another point of interest. So if you have another coat hanger or another lamp that you can use. Ooh, a little too tall. I would definitely make them different heights. So make this one much lower. And then take your fabric and essentially you're going to have 2 points of interest now. Okay, this is perfect. So, let me maybe stand on this side. Actually, this is a really good example. So you can see the 2 points of support, and then we have the tense stretch lines. Actually, we have a compression line right there. And then see how the fabric billows upon itself? They aren't these perfectly straight lines. They're seemingly straight from very far away if you squinted. But actually it's more obvious in person. And you can even bunch them up more. How you can get a lot of these different angles and shapes, and it really does create, like here's a good, let me see it on the screen. See this line right here, that reflection line? How it's like a larger triangle and then it comes to a point. So you definitely want to work more with angles, but it's almost like within these overarching shapes. And if you want even more compression, obviously give it more fabric and it'll have these bigger dips. And you can see how we have this larger dip in the middle and then we have these tighter, smaller ones around it. So fabric is not just super easy to register, and it's not just a one-time deal. I would do a few different examples and play with the fabric so you know how it looks like, or even like there, like see if you add a third point of interest, all of a sudden you're adding a lot of dimensionality. Like I like a lot of these lines. You get a lot of these pinched areas, which create a cool effect. But that would be my advice with fabric. All right, let me go ahead. I'm going to look at the comments now, and we're gonna end this Twitch stream. Let's see here. It's just my halo. Yeah, right. Keep it like right there. That's so weird. I almost want to keep this on for future streams and just have it randomly. Like I'll put something on my Cintiq and it'll be like a little Easter egg if you guys can figure out the whole illustration by the end. Lunala says, I said this earlier, but I don't think you saw it. Just a little tip. My username is Spanish for moonlight, so Luz is pronounced like loose. Oh, Luna Loose. I will remember that, actually. I don't even need to write that down. But I like that. Digital says, I'll show you after the stream how to turn that off. No, I kind of want to keep it on. I mean, I probably should know how to turn it off, but I kind of like it. It's so weird. Kuifa says, not a question, just want to say hey, and I really enjoy your streams. Very informative too. Well, thank you. Fem says, don't know if you saw my message at the beginning of the stream since my internet was cutting off. So I will say it again for a second, but I wanted to thank you for the extra blind confidence print that arrived with my collector piece. Actually, every one of my Patreons got that secondary print as well. So if you want to get a free print from me, I am doing a giveaway till the end of this month. You can get blind confidence. Let me grab it. It is this drawing. So if you would like this drawing as a print for your room or your workplace or wherever you would hang it up, I'm giving it away for my gold tier Patreons, and that goes till the end of the month. And all you have to do is sign up and you'll get it for free. Okay, I think I am done. So I guess when you're drawing fabric, just incorporate the studies into your actual work and you'll see an improvement rather quickly if you're more conscious of it. I think too often fabric gets pushed to the side of not as important, but I really do feel it elevates and heightens the overall effect and I guess quality of your drawing if you make sure you're aware of how you're accurately depicting the wrinkles, and it just will give, I think, a better depiction in the end. Okay, so yeah, thank you so much for coming to this live stream. I do these streams every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Time. And like I said, next week I will be doing a tutorial on drawing eyes. So if you are someone who wants to know more about how to draw eyes, or you feel you're struggling with drawing eyes, come to the stream next week and we will give a little tutorial on that. And I'm open to discussion, so I want to have fun with it. I'm sure I'll have something prepared, but just know the number one thing with eyes is the other dreaded eye. So having to like perfectly draw one eye and then moving on to the next. My biggest advice with that, don't do that. But we'll go more into detail about drawing eyes next week. I just want to thank you guys so much for coming to this live stream, even though I'm kind of sick. So hopefully I didn't mumble over my words too much. And yeah, if you want to join our Discord, there's a link below. We have a little community growing that I am really appreciating, and I'm loving seeing all you guys posting. But also we have a challenge this month going on to draw either something from a dream or a nightmare, and I will be participating in that and drawing my little thumbnails probably later this week. And thank you for following. And yeah, so join there, and if you're one of my patrons, I am very active on answering your questions if you have any questions. And we also have a critique stream, I forgot about that, coming up in March. So if you want me to live critique your work, I am doing a critique stream. It's probably the second week in March I'll do it, and I am going to be doing 9. So if you want to be one of those 9, feel free to submit. Okay, that's all I got. I gotta go eat. Okay. Thank you guys so much for coming, and I'll hopefully talk to you next week. Bye everyone. Oh wait, Dana Bulk has a really quick question and says, what should I start learning first in digital? Learn the software. Learn everything you can about little tips and keyboard shortcuts that you can in Photoshop. It'll save you a lot of time in the long run. Efficiency is huge in digital art, so that'd be my best advice. Okay, bye everyone. Take care. Bye.